There's nothing like watching a great movie on the big screen with an audience the way it was meant to be seen. The energy in the room is infectious. At Cowtown Movie Classics, we partner with the finest institutions in North Texas to bring you the glamour and thrills of old Hollywood with the proper historical context. Each screening features an all-new discussion with a world-class film historian, artist, or special guest, hosted by me, Ryan Bijan. We believe it's important to recognize how the icons and images of yesteryear inspire the entertainment of today. Cowtown Movie Classics. We make the old new.
Oh, it's alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Ryan Bijan, host of Cowtown Movie Classics, and it wouldn't be the Halloween season without a healthy dose of the classic Universal Studios monsters. So today I'm very excited to be presenting the original 1931 version of Frankenstein, starring the immortal Boris Karloff and Colin Clive as the man who made the monster. Joining me today is a very prolific film historian and author. His book, James Whale, A New World of Gods and Monsters, became one of the bases for the Academy Award-winning 1998 film Gods and Monsters, which starred Ian McKellen as director James Whale. It's a pleasure to be sitting here with Mr. James Curtis. How are you doing today, James?
That's fine, Ryan. How are you?
All right. So the original Frankenstein, I mean, perhaps it must be one of the most influential horror or science fiction films ever made.
Yeah, I think so. That's probably true. It certainly spawned a lot of sequels.
What was it about James Whale's background that fascinated you?
Well, he was such a mysterious figure for one, and for another, his films were largely unseen on television. I was at an age where I really didn't see many revival screenings, and even today, you don't see a lot of revivals of his films that were not of the horror classification. So I wanted to know more about him, and really the flashpoint came in 1975. We had an annual film festival here in Los Angeles called Filmex, and they would do older stuff along with new stuff. And so they decided to do a tribute to James Whale in 1975, and a series of afternoon screenings, double features, and then a couple of evening screenings. And so I got a chance to see some films I'd never seen before, and you could tell that the stylistic flourishes that you could detect in the horror films were also there, and when he tackled a musical like Showboat or an adventure story like The Man in the Iron Mask. And so I became quite interested in him as an artist, and so being kind of a completely ignorant of doing this sort of thing, I wrote a letter to a man named Max Lemley, who ran the Lemley Theater chain here in Los Angeles, and asked if he could forward a letter to Carl Laemmle Jr. And he did. And Carl Laemmle Jr. was the producer of Frankenstein and these other early 30s uh, classics. And so he invited me up to talk with him, which I did. And he got David Lewis on the phone, who was James Whale's longtime friend and partner, and also producer of significant films in his own right. And David invited me down to his apartment to talk about James Whale, and so that's how this whole thing started.
Sure. Now, James Whale, for the people in the audience who may be unfamiliar with him, he was born in the United Kingdom. He had a background, a very flamboyant background as a theatrical stage producer. He was a veteran of World War One. There was certainly a lot that went into his films and that I'm sure inspired him artistically.
Mm.
How do we see the James Whale style in something like Frankenstein?
Well, there's a sharp sense of humor that's evident, which you see in a lot of his films. He had a very mordant sense of humor, I guess you'd say, but he had he was trained as an artist, a painter specifically, and so he had a painter's eye, and you can see it in the composition of the individual shots. You can see it in terms of pacing as well. He was a guy who really kind of instinctively knew how to put across a theme like Frankenstein or the war themes that he had done previous to Frankenstein in a very cinematic way. So you see some very aggressive cutting. You see non-traditional compositions, and you see a strong Germanic influence because he was exposed to a lot of 20s German classics, Nosferatu and The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, and some of the silent films of a similar genre as well, like The Cat and the Canary. And so all those were influences on him. Murnau, I think, specifically, Paul Leni also, and he brought that awareness to his filmmaking.
Now, if there's anyone in the audience who has somehow never seen the original Frankenstein film, maybe they read the Mary Shelley novel back in high school, and maybe they're a little rusty. What do they have to look forward to in this version?
Well, this is a version that takes the essence of the novel and boils it down to its basics. It's a short film. It's what, 72 minutes, something like that. And in that time, it grapples with the basic theme of the novel, which is the creation of human life in a extraordinary and supernatural way, and what happens as a result of it. It's a lot about consequences. It's a lot about obsession. It's a lot about it grapples with some of the basic ideas of what living constitutes and how one can pervert the desires of a normal human being when one sees something that's ideally unattainable and they can't attain it all of a sudden. And so what happens as a result of that when you take a creation of your own making and it turns on you? And that's basically the question that gets asked in this film.
Certainly. Now, this movie took a little known character actor who'd been struggling since the silence era by the name of William Henry Pratt, better known to modern audiences as Boris Karloff. And this really is a star making performance. How would you describe his work in this film?
His work in this film is extraordinary. He was a character actor up to that point. Had a great face. He had a very modeled face that could be lit very creatively, and camera people and makeup men loved working with Karloff because Karloff was a distinctive blank canvas, if you will, and they could paint all kinds of things on him and throw lights in various directions. His face his face absorbed any number of treatments and gave you something that was really interesting and compelling at the same time. He had great presence for the camera, and Karloff later, became identified with that genre. He became very successful at it, and he had a career that lasted 35, almost 40 years, I guess. Uh, I I got the opportunity to watch him rehearse in person a Red Skelton hour in 1968. It was about 5 months before he died. He was a guest star in that show with Vincent Price and Red Skelton, of course. And the interesting thing, I thought he was in a wheelchair when I saw him rehearse. When they did the air show, he was actually on his feet. And you could tell that the other two principals, Mr. Skelton and Mr. Price, were glued to their cue cards throughout the skit that they did together. Boris Karloff knew his lines cold. This is a dying man, and he was still professional enough to learn his lines and know them. And so watching him work, even in something as trivial as that, was a great privilege. And you get a sense of how dedicated he was to his craft.
Oh, I can certainly imagine. Now, without further ado, from 1931, director James Whale's Frankenstein. In the 90 years since this movie was made, it's interesting to think that for a modern audience, if you mention The Mummy, they think of the film starring Brendan Fraser, right? If you mention Phantom
Yeah.
of the Opera, you think of the Andrew Lloyd Webber musical. And there have been many great vampires and Dracula movies. But for some reason, to this very day, when you mention the name Frankenstein, people don't even think of the Mary Shelley novel. They think of Boris Karloff and the Jack Pierce makeup. Why
Mhm.
is that still the dominant image in popular culture?
Well, it's an image that sticks in your mind, I think. Nobody else looks quite like that. Things have gotten a lot gorier in the century that ensued, but and James Whale, incidentally, did not approve of going over the top with blood and guts and the like. But the face and I think the performance, the treatment of the monsters, so that as you saw in the film, was very sympathetic. It was an understanding treatment, if you will, and I think that sticks with people, even if they haven't seen the film. There's something that's uh, ingratiating about the character, and I think people are naturally drawn to it because it is a compelling graphic character as well as a compelling uh, human-based character. Let's put it that way. And so it. But if you took any of the elements away from that particular film, if somebody other than James Whale had directed it, if someone other than Karloff had played the monster, somebody other than Colin Clive had played Dr. Frankenstein, you wouldn't have had the same product. And I think it's important that it's useful to see the film for those who haven't seen it because you see the starting point for all of that imagery that we live with these days, especially at Halloween time.
Absolutely. And it's incredibly, as I mentioned earlier, a highly influential film. And it's
Mhm.
interesting to think, like you said, there's certain directors who bring that kind of vision, who bring their unique eye to the project. I could see this film done as, a straightforward, what do you want to call it, like a Regency era period piece,
Right.
right? But there's something interesting that happens in Frankenstein, even more so than Dracula. I think this is the film that really establishes the universal horror style. There's a timelessness to it. Does it take place in the 19th century? Is it set in the 1930s? Certainly the Kenneth Strickfaden laboratory, right, has all this very
Yeah.
futuristic technology. So there is a very prominent timelessness in this film that I think James Whale really kind of pushed to the forefront.
Well, I think it's also a very cinematic film. Dracula, which preceded it, is kind of a stagey thing. And Todd Browning was a very experienced silent film director, but he became known more for perverse subject matter like Freaks and the Lon Chaney vehicles of that period. But Dracula itself, if you look at it, it's very creaky. And in a sense, that enhances its appeal. But if you did not have Bela Lugosi in the role, uh, it would lose a lot of its charisma, a lot of its strength, I think. Frankenstein stands on its own feet as a work of cinema, and it was early for James Whale. He had done war subjects up to that point, Journey's End, Hell's Angels, Waterloo Bridge. He took this one on a lark and wanted to get away from the idea of dealing with the Great War in a film again. And as a result, he did not feel any restrictions on what he could do. They gave him carte blanche. And so I think he had fun with it at the same time. He saw a way of modernizing the story and making it relevant to audiences from 1931 on. And so it's it set the pace for what came afterwards. There are some very cinematic films that came in that series later on. Uh, Bride of Frankenstein obviously included, but Invisible Man, Werewolf of London, The Black Cat. Those are different directors, but they're very fine directors, and they took something that James Whale kind of gave them as a starting point, and they built on that, and that's why those films still have an audience after all these years.
Right. Now, I'm curious about James Whale's involvement with this film. As you mentioned earlier, of course, Dracula, for all its staginess, it was a huge hit earlier that year in
Mm.
1931, which led to the green light of Frankenstein. I had always heard at one point it was going to be the director Robert Florey making Frankenstein with, of course, Bela Lugosi as either the monster or Baron Frankenstein. So what happened in the pre-production process that got James Whale involved? And was it him? Did he not want to work with Lugosi, or did Lugosi walk away because of the monster makeup? What's the real story with
No,
all
no.
that?
Well, the thing I point out in the book is Lugosi. If you look at what else Lugosi did in 31 and 32, he was willing to play supporting parts and other features. He was in a Joey Brown comedy, for instance. He's in the Black Camel, which is a Charlie Chan mystery, But he's not top billed in those things. He's just part of the cast, prominent member of the cast, memorable member of the cast. But in the case of Frankenstein, James Whale did not want him. He was pretty clear about that. Lugosi, I think, uh, covered for that later in life. He said he went out and searched and found Boris Karloff for James Whale. That's not true either. I think that I think that they did make a test according to the trade papers about 10 minutes of footage, creation footage with Lugosi made up, and didn't look anything, as I understand it, like Karloff looked in the film. And Junior Lemley saw it. He was out of town when they made it, and he took a look at it when he came back, and he didn't like it. And on top of which, I asked Junior Lemley in 1975 if Robert Florey wrote a script for the film, and he said yes, but it wasn't very good.
Hmm.
And so he was down on Robert Florey. And Robert Florey is primarily known as a European film journalist. He was based in Los Angeles, but he was writing for the film journals in Paris, I think. And he was still alive at the time. I have a series of letters that Robert Florey wrote me about Frankenstein and James Whale. And I think the basic thing was, if you look at Robert Florey's films in later years, and he did a lot of television in the 50s and 60s. You see a competent second string director. Did a lot of B movies in the 30s and 40s. Did a lot of television, including a thriller with Boris Karloff, incidentally. But he wasn't on the level that James Whale was. If you compare James Whale's best films to Robert Florey's best films, you'll see a vast difference between the two.
Yeah, perhaps. But I am a big fan of Murders in the Rue Morgue. I do want to put that out there. I think it's a great
Yeah.
film.
My problem with Murders in the Rue Morgue is that it doesn't go anywhere. There's some
Yeah.
shots in it like that swing shot, which really doesn't contribute to the action or the plot. One thing about James Whale, when he previewed a film, he was ruthless in cutting it down afterwards. I think sometimes he takes too much out. Bride of Frankenstein being an example of that. It was originally about 90 minutes long, and I think now it plays at 75. And you can see after the preview he went back and shortened it significantly, and lost some things that I think they're too bad that we don't have them today. But he was very much conscious of keeping the thing moving, and he wanted all to be interesting and exciting. And I think he accomplished that in most every case of the films that I've seen that he did, and I've seen them all.
Certainly. I want to go back a little bit. So, do we know who directed the Lugosi test footage? Was it Whale or was it?
No, it was Robert Florey. Whale wasn't on the film at that
Yeah,
point.
it was Robert Florey. Okay, I
Robert
was.
Florey wanted the assignment,
Hmm.
and so he took advantage of Junior being out of town to do it, and they shot it on the Dracula set, the kind of the Castle Dracula set, and for whatever reason, I think the main thing with Florey, as I understand the script that he wrote, is the monster is a monster. There's nothing human about him, and there's no sense of sympathy to him. If you go back and look at the novel, also the monster talks a great deal, and he's a pathetic creature. Uh, Florey was just after pure, unadulterated horror, and not necessarily was interested in creating a sympathetic title character. I think maybe he was following the lead of Dracula, because Dracula isn't terribly sympathetic either. He is what he is, uh, and I think James Whale sensed, let's say, that he needed to take that character off in a different direction in order to make it land with the public.
Sure. And I mean, the movie certainly landed with the public. What was that initial reception like at the time?
Well, amazing, and it was something that really shocked audiences. And David gave me his account of being at the preview in Santa Barbara, first time they put it in front of an audience. And he said in the first minutes where they're in the graveyard, and they start shoveling dirt in on top of the casket that's just been lowered into the ground. And he said you heard an audible gasp from the audience when that happened. They hadn't seen that before. And in a talking film where you had the audio going with it. And he said there were people who would get up, go out to the lobby, come back, get up and go out to the lobby again. It was strong stuff in 1931. We look at it now, we're very familiar with that, and we've had a lot worse stuff thrown at us since then. But there's something about the starkness of the imagery and the starkness of the audio. There's no music in the film to speak of. So all of that works to its advantage, I think.
Certainly. Well, like you, I'm a huge fan of James Whale as a director because of these horror films like The Old Dark House, The Invisible Man, of course, Bride of Frankenstein. It got me to want to track down some of his other work. I love Showboat. I love The Man in the Iron Mask. Why, I mean, these are all very, even by today's standards, very entertaining, very artfully done movies. Why didn't he have a bigger career, say later on in the 1940s or 50s?
Well, a friend of mine edited a collection of diary entries by Charles Brackett, who was partnered with Billy Wilder at Paramount in the 40s. And and David Lewis was at Paramount in the 40s. So Brackett and Wilder would have lunch with David and James Whale occasionally. And there was one diary entry where Brackett was working on producing a film called The Uninvited, which is one of the great ghost stories of all
Yeah.
time. And James Whale was giving him suggestions over lunch, and he wrote in his diary that he regrets that he can't use James Whale for as to direct it, but Buddy DeSilva, who was in charge of production at Paramount at that time, didn't like him and wouldn't approve his being on the film. But Brackett would have hired Whale to direct The Uninvited, which makes you wonder what the heck Whale would have done with that subject matter. It's a great film as it is, but he would have given it his own spin. You think of certain films that were done later that he should have done. The Bluebird being another one, another Fox film of the period. But I think by 39 he was diminished creatively by the treatment that he got at Universal after the Laemmles sold out. They pretty much let him do anything he wanted to do at Universal in the early 30s. And when the Laemmles left the studio in 36, he was not handed over to a sympathetic management. And he bounced around to other studios. I think the last really, really good, stylish James Whale film is a period comedy he did called The Great Garrick, which was done at Warner Brothers in 1937. Wonderful film about the Garrick, the actor, in his time period, and it's very stylish, very entertaining. Brian Aherne, Olivia de Havilland, and Edward Everett Horton. Uh, he had a way of taking his cinematic sensibilities, if you want to call them that, and applying them to any genre. He never did a Western, for instance, but he tried most of them and he did very well at them. He even did a screwball comedy with Remember Last Night, which is kind of a Thin Man sort of mystery that was done in 1935. He could do successful plays. He did The Kiss Before the Mirror. In fact, he did it twice. By Candlelight, both of those subjects have been put out on Blu-ray recently. So his films are slowly getting out there where people can see them and enjoy them and evaluate them, but it's taken a long time.
Mm-hmm. Now, I mentioned earlier the film Gods and Monsters, which of course it's a wonderful film, but it's a very highly fictionalized take in the vein of
Yeah.
something like Sunset Boulevard. So what was the true fate of James Whale? I mean, what happened to him in his later years?
Well, he grew ill. He had a series of strokes, and he was they affected him in terms of not necessarily physically so much as he was racked with self-doubt and nerves and just and I think retirement did not serve him well. He could only paint so many pictures in his studio in Pacific Palisades. Um, so he was an unhappy man, out to sea, so to speak. And I think that when he made the decision to kill himself, it was reasoned. I have the letter he left behind to his friends that David Lewis gave me, and it was a sad ending for a man who really did himself in just about 6 months before some of his films were released to television for the first time. And so people, even a little bit later in the same year, 1957, got to see as part of the Shock Theater package, Frankenstein and The Invisible Man. Old Dark House, unfortunately, was not available for a long time. Was even thought lost for a period of time. But today, as far as I know, all of his films still exist in 35 millimeter, and they make for a tremendous body of work if you have the chance to see them and assess them as the works that they are.
Oh, certainly. Now, I have to say this, I've always wanted to see Journey's End, but I've never been able to find a commercial release of it.
No, you can see it on YouTube in its complete form.
Oh, is it on YouTube? Okay.
It's on YouTube. They ran it on British television. It's the British Film Institute print, and so you can see it that way.
So is there a rights issue like in the United States why it hasn't been like on Kino or someone like that putting it out?
No, I don't know. I think it's probably having access to a decent print of it. The prints that I was aware of in this country were all cut down. It was a perennial second feature in movie theaters in the 40s. It's out of copyright now in this country. But it turned out that BFI had the one complete print and a very watchable print, and that's the one that I trust they preserved it correctly now. But it's been shown on British television, and so that's where the YouTube print comes from.
Hmm. So, James, do you have any closing thoughts on the original Frankenstein?
It's important, as I said earlier, to appreciate the people who were involved in it, and that most of them brought a lot to the party. You had the Hall brothers, Charles Danny Hall, who was the art director on it. He was British and he worked very well with James Whale. We have copies of sketches that he did for James Whale that are beautiful and evocative, and were followed to the letter when it came time to put them on the screen. Colin Clive, who played Captain Stanhope in Journey's End and rose to theatrical stardom as a result. And James Whale brought him over initially to make Journey's End here. Journey's End, the film, was made in Hollywood, and because of the recording technology they needed for it. Clive did not live a long, happy life. He died in 1937 of pneumonia. But his Dr. Frankenstein is a variation on Captain Stanhope, and if you watch Journey's End and take in Captain Stanhope as personified by Colin Clive, you'll see the roots of Dr. Frankenstein in that performance. Um, Edward Van Sloan, Dwight Fry, both great character actors who were around for a long time. Mae Clarke, whom I knew fairly well, who had starred in James Whale's version of Waterloo Bridge, which is out on home video. And if you get a chance to see it, she's wonderful in it. She's a terrific actress. This is her prime period. And she always thought that Frankenstein was a bit on the thankless side, and it is. But she was very good in what she had to do in it. I tried one time, just to say it, that I tried watching the film one time just to concentrate on Mae's performance. I was going to pay attention to Mae, and I was going to try to forget about Clive and Karloff and the others. And I wasn't able to do it. Your eye just naturally goes to those guys, and so Mae is kind of window dressing in it. Wasn't a challenging part, but she's very good in it, and so everybody who was involved in it harken back also to James Whale's theatrical period on stage. Frederick Carr he worked with. He worked with Colin Clive on stage back there. He brought a lot of British stage actors over for their first films. When he did The Old Dark House the following year, it was Charles Laughton's first American film. You had a number of people that he had worked with on the British stage who he imported for that film, and that's one of the reasons why it's such a delightful film to watch today. And happily, after the amount of time involved, almost a full century, there's a beautiful print of it available on home video, and with Gloria Stewart's commentary on the extra track, which I'm rather proud of because that was my idea.
Oh, wow. Well, I have to ask you, since you knew Mae Clarke, did you ever ask her officially? Because I've heard a few different things. Why didn't she do Bride of Frankenstein?
Well, May had a history of mental illness, depression. She had a drinking problem from time to time, so she was in and out of films, and she was in sanitariums a couple of times, and so she did not have the ability, due to her health, to build a consistent image with the public and put her and keep her in demand as an actress. But she was very good at what she did do. She had a very wry way of looking at things in her later years. Also, they had Valerie Hobson under contract, who was, I think, 17 years old at the time of Bride of Frankenstein. They wanted to get their money's worth from her. May was not under contract to them, so I think the idea of just putting her with the Bride of Frankenstein crew made sense to them. She's kind of like Elizabeth in the first film. She's just there. She doesn't have a lot to do in it. Valerie Hobson really came into her own in British films in the 40s and 50s. Kind Hearts and Coronets, for instance, being one of her great ones, and she got a little maturity on her, and she was a great presence in British cinema later on, and delightful to talk to. Also, I interviewed her not long before she died by phone, and she was marvelous to talk to and had great things to say that are all in the book.
Well, a very beautiful woman. I'm a huge fan of her in Bride of Frankenstein and
Yeah.
Werewolf of London, seeing her pop up in all.
Yeah, Werewolf of London is a strange one in that people forget about it. When Kevin Brownell did his documentary on Universal, they just ignored it entirely, which I think is a bad rap. I think it's a very well done film, and Henry Hull is very good, and it's not Lon Chaney Jr., but it's still compelling and cinematic, and I think it's one of the high watermarks for the Universal string of films that were made in that time period.
I certainly agree, and there's a lot of James Whale in that movie too, because I think of what is it like the old British Cockney women that run the inn. There's a sense of humor in it. It feels very much like The Invisible Man.
Yeah, The Visible Man is another one like that. Well, that comes from The Invisible Man takes place in a place like where James Whale grew up, and so he knew all the traditions of the public houses and how they cluster and the ghost stories and legends that existed in those times and places. And so, of course, that all informed what he did as well. But Invisible Man has so much texture and style to it that it goes way beyond just a simple story about someone who makes himself invisible and has to cope with the consequences of that, in effect.
Hmm. All right. Well, James, is there anything you're working on right now, or do you have anything out recently that you want the audience to know about?
Well, the one that's out right now, as you know, is Buster Keaton, A Filmmaker's Life, which I can happily recommend to everybody. And the one I'm working on right now, I'm almost finished with it, is called Comedy is a Grim Business. And it's the making of Stanley Kramer's epic comedy. It's a mad, 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 mad world. And I'm not done with it yet, but I'm getting there, and I think it's going to make a compelling read for those who enjoy that film and want to know more about it and how the circumstances under which they made it.
All right. Well, I know I'm certainly looking forward to it. Mr. James Curtis, once again, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
If you're in the audience, I hope you enjoyed today's conversation as much as we had having it. Once again, my name is Ryan Bijan. We'll see you next time.